Some of you might be asking what is involved with Nordic walking. It's a fitness activity where they use specially designed poles. Those poles will activate the upper extremity and also the core. And it's thought, some studies suggest that it actually increases caloric capacity or need rather by up to 20%. So kind of interesting. It's been looked at in a number of different conditions and mythologies. This is one of the first that actually looked at it in terms of chronic low back pain. So this is a sample kind of presentation. One of the things that's going to help you out is if you look at Clifford and Andrade in table 2.2, they do very well to kind of break down all the relevant parts of a study and they ask some specific questions. So for your presentation, you don't have to answer all of these questions. What I would suggest is to take 2 or 3 from each and tailor your answers to what you find in your readings. And some questions might or answers might come readily to you, and those are the ones you'd want to pick. So in general, when you're looking at the study, you need to kind of think, is it a peer-reviewed type of study? That peer review process in and of itself is actually going to heighten the study itself, is going to reduce the risk for bias. And often one of the concerns with studies is that there might be some inherent bias in it. Good questions to start off with when you're actually starting to do any sort of review for a study. If you are talking about your online presentation, take a second and a slide to talk about why is new or interesting for yourself. And again, for myself, I looked at Nordic walking in some other studies. This is the first one where I saw it used in a different way with respect to chronic low back pain. I found it interesting when I was looking at it that there was some evidence that group activities fostered a greater compliance, and I thought that was interesting, as well as the fact that some people responded to specific trunk exercises differently than from aerobic type of activities like Nordic walking. So again, just new information for me that was interesting and I thought it was interesting to share with you. One of the things I would encourage you to do is to use visuals as much as possible. And here's an example. When you're talking about something like research design, one of the important considerations is how groups are laid out. And here there are, at the end of the day, there was 126 people involved in the study. And of those 126, they were very equally distributed between 3 groups that were part of the study. So there was a supervised and unsupervised Nordic walking group or groups, and one that just had usual care or advice. So a visual like this is really kind of good because it demonstrates what you're trying to say in terms of a key consideration in research design without getting overly texty or wordy. One of the other considerations in any study is attrition, and for this study I thought it was really important, and that's again why I wanted to use a schematic here. The authors of the study wanted 151 people in the study, or that's how many they were able to get, which isn't a great number. Of that, there were some folks that were unable to actually even take part in the study, so that number went to 136. And once they actually started the study, they had 10 dropouts. So people dropping out, or attrition rates, can have a very profound effect on the relevancy of a study in terms of how easy it is then for them to make generalizations. When you're doing your introductory work for the sample, again, look at table 2.2. And if you're looking at the introduction itself, think about these questions. Does it have a look at the literature? So do they talk about some of the other research studies that have taken place? And is there relevance? So in the particular case of the Nordic walking study, chronic low back pain is a very costly issue for society. And Nordic walking may be a very cost-effective way of actually looking at addressing that. So that's pretty interesting in and of itself. In the methods section, you want to look for a couple of things. Again, look at table 2.2 to help you with that. But do they describe the participants really well? Do you have enough information about the interventions used? And what does the author or the authors tell you about the outcome measures? Oftentimes there are some specific measures that might be used, and they often have a history to them in terms of being used in other studies or in clinical practice. At the end of the day, with the methods section, as a reader, you should be able to replicate that study. In the results section, have a look. Is there any missing data? For example, are there some participants that are not accounted for? Are there some test results that perhaps you don't actually see any sort of summary for? Those are the sort of things you look for. Are there findings consistent with the purpose and procedure? And lastly, statistical versus clinical significance. Sometimes in studies there will be changes which are noted, but they don't necessarily have that great of a power that they're going to make a difference in terms of clinical practice. So sometimes people will talk about statistical versus clinical significance. In the discussion or conclusion area of the study, have a look and in your own mind think of whether the author's conclusions or statements actually make sense. Are they making statements which are supportive of their hypothesis? Are they making statements where they really don't have the information to back up what they're saying? Second point here, limitations. Good studies are very, very objective in their view, and they will be very, very clear as to what some of the issues were with the study in terms of what might be changed for possible further studies, and certainly providing direction for further research is an important consideration. Some of the limitations I found, and I encourage you to actually make mention of these in your study, these are ones I found. The follow-up with the folks that were actually part of the study was very short, and in order to kind of see the cause and effect of an intervention, it needs to be much longer. I found the sample size to be very small. Again, it started around 150, went down to 126, and those sorts of numbers are not enough to actually make any sort of good generalizations here. The third point here, method for ascertaining the desired walking intensity. They actually took the baseline from the instructors as opposed to the people who had the various functional limitations. So that might have skewed the baseline measures. The measures and their context is the fourth point there. So they made measure of specific outcome measures, but they didn't provide a lot of context there. The fifth and final point here is they used accelerometers to measure distance and pace. However, they had the participants actually affix them to themselves, so there might be some errors in terms of getting that information back. So those are the limitations I found. Also important, of course, are what the authors say. And they made note of some very interesting limitations. Certainly, there is a stigma with Nordic walking, and I believe that it's only old people that do it, so that might have some ramifications in terms of the way things are reported out. They also found the accelerometer issue to be an important one. They thought they had too many folks potentially to pull from in terms of their inclusion criteria. They thought that travel, because some people traveling from a long distance, might be an issue for folks. And they found that really what they needed to have was a larger sample size, and they were actually looking at 442 people. So quite significant increase in the number of participants in the study. Here's a very important kind of consideration which you really should report on in your presentation. Is this going to change my practice in any way? So I would certainly think more about talking to clients about the use of trunk and general exercise and aerobic activities, and likely incorporating both, because through reading that, I was really kind of, it reinforced some of the readings I had previously and some of the discussions I had with some other peers. I would certainly consider the use of Nordic walking for some of my clients, particularly, of course, those that need to offload some stresses from joints, whether it's knees and hips, but also folks with low back pain, because there might be some evidence supportive of that. I would certainly identify resources in my local area, and I've done so to date, so I can actually send people if they're interested. And the last one here, I would consider trying firsthand, and I actually have a date set up for that. So stay tuned. I'm going to try it and see how it works out, and I'll report back to the class on that. In terms of the summary, what the study itself said was that there were possible gains with supervision around pain and disability. And they thought that supervision in and of itself might actually have an effect in that it causes people to report better outcomes. And some of that might be because of something called an attention bias.